Greetings from Lausanne and welcome to our fourth and last keynote speech today with Harriet Green. Pleasure to be here with you and with Harriet, who's going to join us in a second. And she's going to share insights gathered throughout her extremely successful and very much ongoing career. This career started in the electronics industry, where Harriet ultimately became CEO of a company for a number of years before a big change in industry in 2012, when she became CEO of Thomas Cook, the iconic leisure travel company. Over a period of 2 years, Harriet led a very successful transformation and rebranding effort, which led to a market capitalization growing tenfold. And one of the reasons I remember this is that the day Harriet stepped down from Thomas Cook led to a magnificent drop of 350 million pounds in market cap, which is a fantastic compliment for a CEO when the market says, oh my God, no, we need her. This, I think, is a great compliment. Harriet left Thomas Cook to join IBM and become the general manager of the Watson Internet of Things unit, and then became the CEO of IBM Asia Pacific, and she concluded that tour of duty very recently. Along the way, Harriet participated and served on a number of boards, including BAE Systems for many years, and Emerson also for a number of years. And she is currently serving on the board of the very powerful Singapore Economic Development Board, and also on the board of King's College Business School. Over the years, Harriet have won a score of awards, including, and here I want to make sure I get them right, Women in Technology Institute Award, Women in Technology Hall of Fame. Also in 2019, she was named among Fortune magazine's most powerful international women. Beyond this success as a business leader, Harriet has also had a number of important positions and things that she held very dear to her heart. One of them was she's been a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion in all its forms, including gender diversity, but not only. And while she was the head of IBM Asia Pacific, the unit made a lot of progress on diversity and inclusion, again, on the gender side, but also in Asia, of course, you also have ethnic diversity and religious diversity. And so she worked very hard on these fronts. Harriet also cares deeply about creating cultures that embrace lifelong learning and encourage and enable employees to continue to renew their skills. And in fact, during, again, her tenure at the head of IBM Asia Pacific, she launched a new education model in 7 markets called P-Tech to bring STEM education and experience to young people. And this involved 25 P-Tech schools that are now open in the region. She also launched STEM for Girls in India to improve the skills and career of 1 million female students over a 3-year period. Last but not least, as I was preparing this talk with Harriet, I also realized that it's quite important for her to insist and encourage all of us to bring all of our facets, all the facets of ourselves to work. And so, in addition to being a very successful leader, she's also a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister. She's also a cyclist. She raised 100,000 pounds on a Ride London 100 miles race. And she's currently, and I found that quite interesting and quite important, she's currently training to be a counselor for domestic violence abuse with the NHS. With all this background, we are really excited to hear Harriet discuss her insights. There's going to be 4 major themes. One will be innovation-led growth. How can we innovate and how can we energize innovation-based growth, and how can we remove obstacles to innovation? Resilience as a leader, where does the energy come from? And I'm sure a number of us have been asking ourselves the question over the last few weeks. Assembling and leading a team that is characterized by strong diversity and inclusion. And then within this theme of diversity and inclusion, how do we manage and better yet celebrate the differences between people in a way that supercharges the team? So Harriet has a few remarks that she wants to share with us, and then we will go to a Q&A session. Harriet, thank you for joining us. You have our undivided attention.
So we're going to do two things this morning, I hope. The first is to plant some seeds that will germinate together with your other great speakers. The second is I will measure the success of this based on the interaction and the questions, and we will take the major themes of the questions and make sure that we give some response out of this session as well. Now, my first slide really says it all. These little visuals are the seeds. And I believe it is very, very important to think about us as leaders with it all starting with us. We are the center of this vortex of change. How we are, how we exude, what we put into ourselves, our diet, our exercise, our state of being, and how we control ourselves so that we're able to influence others is hugely important. That is not ego. That is about our ability to really lead and inspire. The second chart that I'll move to is really, all of you know, and some have spoken to the challenging nature of the times that we're in. But we see an unprecedented growth opportunity. As leaders, I think it is imperative that we help drive a growth mindset through innovation. And a growth mindset is very much based on learning it all. A fixed mindset, a non-growth mindset, is very much about knowing it all. And so, you know, yesterday, there were discussions around what you focus on and how you build this, but helping our teams to learn and taking advantage of this downturn is very important. Many of you know from my bio that I'm a historian by primary training. And if you look at history, companies like Sony, after the extraordinary global pandemic in 1957, came out of that with the transistor radio. Microsoft, after the downturn in 1975, was launched as a new business when many in the tech sector could barely make payroll. And Apple, after the dot-com crash in 2001, came out with the iPod. Adobe, after the financial crisis in 2008, really transformed their business from an on-premise business to a SaaS software business, transforming their economic model. So it is very important, I think, that we look at this as an opportunity to really drive innovation. And I'm going to share with you how I have done this in my various roles. The next slide, we can really start ideating and solutioning with our teams. Determining what are the most important problems to work on. I heard advice that you got yesterday. Determine what those problems are, and then immerse your teams in the data around our users, our employees, to create these solutions. It is extremely motivating for our teams to start this process. And I believe very strongly that the enemy of innovation-led growth is institutional inertia, reinforced by the underlying systems and processes that our government, our unit, our business, our university has. So if you go to the next slide or the little graphic, you can use any of the agile methodologies that are out there. This is IBM's methodology, which I've used myself with hundreds and hundreds of clients, where having decided what the key problems are, really drilling into the data on those problems, immersing yourselves in the user data, the client data, your own data, employees' data, and then begin to observe, reflect, and then very rapidly make a solution, whether that's a low fidelity prototype, but quickly and effectively taking this methodology so that, and as the next slide shows it very clearly, I've always used the term pali pali. It means very fast in Korean. So that very fast and in a very motivating way, you are creating the beginnings of a solution, a new product, a new service, and beginning to take some risk. You've heard many talk about failing fast. I love it then. Say that idea or solution doesn't particularly work, or there are some things, I was talking to Jean-Francois earlier, that you want to improve by iteration. That Tata, for example, has a wonderful program called Dare to Try, and it really celebrates noble failure or the need to iterate and improve something. So however you see the landscape coming out of COVID, and we can talk about that if you're interested, there are 4 or 5 scenarios that I think, we'll move to. But if you involve your teams in this agile method with the biggest problems to start making solutions, it is highly motivating and effective. And then, as we move to this next slide, it is critical. Research shows all of the data that having demographic and cognitive diversity is absolutely fundamental to success. Of course, because of people's age, their sex, their color, their creed, their sexuality, and their physical ability, we want great team members, but also getting cognitive difference. Those of us who think in very, very different ways, bringing together, for example, the ancient technology of wheels together with luggage, and spawning a whole new industry. That was born out of cognitive diversity, people whose brains think differently to create new products and new solutions. The same with code breakers and crossword puzzle experts, how you bring different thinkers to the table. And then it is all powered by you. If we go to the next slide, it is our role, I think, very simply put, to create a joy of this learning, a magnetism with each of your team members that creates great connection, and that you demonstrate you like yourself, you like what you do, you like how you do it, and you are totally able to transmit this to your team with a kindness and an empathy that is so, so important at this time as we move to new normal out of COVID. And with this, I have summed it up on the next slide, that it is so evident to me, having worked in many different industries, most of the continents around the world where I've lived and worked, that EQ, your own personal resilience, born out of treating yourself with respect, making sure that you are well and healthy and strong and energized, that it is EQ, your resilience, your grit, and grace in dealing with people that will trump in the new normal. And how you articulate this every day through the team, so that on your metaphoric Monday, as you work together to really put these learnings from a sensational program, OWP, into action, that you are innovating, that you are learning, and the holy grail is growth through innovation as you dare to try and solution great new ideas. So I hope this has planted some seeds, and that Jean-Francois will now take some of your questions as we begin to make this interactive.
Absolutely.
hope you can see me and hear me, Jean-Francois.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much, Harriet, for these opening thoughts. So, as questions are going to start coming in, if I may, let me start with one or two of my own. I was hearing you refer a number of times to what you've called grit and grace, which I think is a very nice way of putting it, and the joy that you need to have as a leader. You had also started with that point. You said, look, it starts with you and your own energy. This energy is quite palpable when we see you and we hear you. But for many of us over the last 3-4 months, it has been challenging. And I'm sure that it has been challenging for a few of the people who are or will be watching us. Do you ever have like moments where your energy is going down a little bit? How do you suggest leaders can maintain not only the energy, so energy I guess is one, but also the joy that you mentioned, the joy of being in charge? There's got to be days where when you wake up and you open your eyes, this joy isn't there, or not.
Yeah, no, I think first of all, there's a foundational piece, a sort of psychological piece that's hugely important around treating yourself with respect. You know, you need to have enough sleep. You need to have input and output that's balanced. Often in leadership positions, you are lacking time. And I've always said that it is critical that we find an hour a day as we are at the vortex of this change to run, to skip, to jump, to read, whatever it may be. You must recharge yourself. And then I think be mindful that every interaction you have as the leader is the most important action or interaction for that individual. So being well prepared, never being off. And when you are tired, of course, there are times when you're exhausted, traveling the globe, anxious about results, etc. It is important, very important, to take yourself off for an hour or so, maybe a day or so, and totally recharge. Whether that's cycling, tennis, reading, you need to demonstrate to your teams that you're really happy with who you are. That doesn't come if you're exhausted, unhealthy, massively overweight or underweight, or not getting the learning that you need. So you have to start with you and make sure that you're in tip-top condition. And if you're not, do something about it. And if you can't, you're not fit to be a leader.
We have a number of questions around diversity and inclusion. So one of them says, could you further illustrate how you managed in your different companies that diversity, inclusive and diverse teams is good for business? And then there's a question around teleworking arrangement, and will that affect diversity? Will it make it easier for firms to be more diverse and inclusive, the fact that people can work from home, or not?
Yeah, I think that the whole issue of diversity and inclusion, the data is pretty well proven around the boards of the world that have greater diversity. People who think differently have, by the research done, stopped major catastrophes. And indeed, those who all think, act, go to the same golf club, behave in exactly the same way, herd mentality or groupthink, end up moving towards great disaster. So the data is pretty well established that demographic and cognitive diversity, facilitated with an openness, is powerful in the problem-solving solutions. To get there, you need to do a number of things. First of all, you need the company, the unit, to commit to it. And that means a plan, just like it were climate change, just like it's how do you grow sales? You need a plan, a clearly stated goal with measures, timelines, and actions. You need champions, and you need every day with all of your colleagues, male, female, to be taking the actions and the decisions that help shape really, really clear steps towards whatever the goal that you chose was, just like it was any other business problem. And then I think you need real statements, communication that make sure that everyone feels they can bring their whole selves to work. There's a great deal of research around covering that if people think it is not good in your company to share that you have 2 little ones under 5, or that your partner is of a certain sex, or that you feel very strongly around a particular religious element, that people feel it is a safe environment where they can discuss these issues, and the data proves that productivity, when you can bring 200% of yourself to work, powerfully supports organizations. So there's a psychology, a physiology, and then structural work every day by the male and female leaders to create this demographic, cognitive inclusion, which leads to diversity.
And so I think a very, very key point you're making here, Harriet, is too often we think that just because the business case is there, somehow it's going to happen by itself. But of course it won't. There are a number of obstacles and barriers. And as you said, it is important for leaders to be deliberate and disciplined about it, just as they are. Sure. To create more customer-focused organizations or more agile organizations.
Absolutely.
There's a question here asking you, how do you think the new normal will be? So you mentioned there are possible scenarios for the post-crisis world.
Yeah.
How do you think the world is going to be different in the next few years from before this crisis?
Yes, I really think so. And I think we have to be prepared in our agile methodologies and the problems that we think are the most important for our businesses, for kind of broadly one of these 4 scenarios that people are talking about. I think the first one is what people are calling sort of a digital enclave environment, where, you know, mostly the virus is controlled, there is bounce back, it's a little bit unpredictable, but we're starting to use digital in a much more powerful, positive way. The second is a sort of a tech-powered innovation drive where society and business and government and universities roar back with new digital powerful programs. And there will be a mix of physical interaction, digital interaction. People have choice to work at home, to travel on public transport, to work in offices. The third one is one that is I think, a deep worry with the markets yesterday and today. I think the markets fear this one, a sort of growing divide where there is a prolonged recession, serious mental health issues, as all of us feel we're fed up being told what to do and aren't optimizing or able to optimize our potential. And there is a growing divide between the digital haves and the digital have-nots. And then I think the fourth is somewhere in between this, in this together, which companies are talking about. I think some of the major consultancy firms where communities are pulling together because it's not as bleak as the growing divide, and we're actually using technology, using each other to bridge some of those gaps. Whatever the scenario, I think motivating our teams to work on, as I heard the great presentation yesterday, the 5 big problems or the 5 big opportunities as you know, Sony, Microsoft, Apple, Adobe, Singapore as a nation worked on, is a great way to bring the teams in and start iterating new solutions, new products, new services very fast.
Harriet, there is a comment about observing and saluting your energy, and saying probably things have not necessarily been always super easy for you. Has there been a big leadership challenge, or has there been one or two moments that have really challenged you, and how did you deal with it, and what are some of your insights and learning from them?
Oh, most definitely. It's the best of questions. Yeah. I faced many challenges. As you can probably tell, I'm a highly energetic transformer. I've been transforming businesses for the last decade. And as many of you have read, there's more social media and more press coverage on me than I wish there was. And many of you have seen the public select committee hearings after the very sad demise of Thomas Cook 5 years after I left the business. But one of the great learnings for me after my 2.5 years at Thomas Cook was the rate and pace of the transformation was entirely necessary for the state of the business. Employees, investors, my colleagues, my engagement rating, everything, the press was very, very positive that we had Thomas Cook back on the right track. But the board that were predominantly from travel and were predominantly not transformers themselves felt that I was perhaps too radical, too wired, too energetic. And they thought that the transformation was done. In my experience of digital transformations, they take at least 5 years. The first 2.5 years were dramatic and great, but I failed myself to take the board as carefully with me. I was too strong, too direct, too aggressive to make sure that the digital transformation, the mobile apps, the data work, all of the virtual reality, taking travel from one century to another, that I did not take the board with me. And that was a very great learning. So I dusted myself off and I thought the number one thing I need now is to be around people that are smarter and better than me. And that kind of summed up most of the IBM senior team. And I must learn more about this tech that I'm talking about. I must know in detail how cloud, data, the Internet of Things, the things that will change our lives with AI going forward, that I truly understand them so I can better take those that are not in that position, many boards, to the right level. And that was a great learning. So sometimes you can be too energetic and too tough and too passionate, too strong and too fast. One has to moderate, and IBM helped me with that.
And a very good reminder for all of us that we succeed by managing down and sideways, but our energy plug is plugged from above. And so it's always important to remind leaders that managing up is also part of the deal. And sometimes we have a tendency to say, look, they gave me the job, they see what I do, they're going to appreciate it. But you're quite right, especially when we're going against the grain, we need to manage up. Now, one of the things that you just came up is this notion of institutional inertia that you had mentioned in your remarks before. And you said, look, one of the big obstacles to innovation is institutional inertia. How do you break it? Because one of the causes, of course, of institutional inertia is success. How do you shake up an organization in order to break or to start to crack at least this institutional inertia?
Yeah, I think this is the $64 billion question. It doesn't really matter. I was recently working with the senior team of a big tech company that's certainly much younger than IBM. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, the age of a company or how long it's been established. But all units, all universities, all governments will have a way of doing things. They'll have underlying systems and processes. So if you're going to have to make change happen, I think there are 3 things I've always done. First, you either have to drive it from the absolute top, You have to either be the driving force as the leader, or you have to have a very strong connection, championing, support from the very top. Secondly, it is absolutely fundamental that you work kind of through these systems and processes, but introducing new elements and new measures, like the Tata Dare to Try, the celebrating. You know, companies on the whole don't like to talk about things that don't work. Right. Celebrating failure, or celebrating, okay, this was good, but we could iterate and improve in this way, needs to be added in to those systems and processes. And it is critical that new measures, new people are working on the 5 most important growth initiatives, or the 5 most important problems. I've learned through my career that it's sort of a third. A third of the people I inherited are great. They want to drive change. They want to drive innovation. They have ingenuity. They're fantastic. A third I've often promoted from within, who have an idea or a rebellious streak, or are just got an element of a cognitive way of breaking or making things that we need. And a third I bring in from outside. And then that mix really needs to ensure that we're measuring the new growth, the innovation, the new people. If you do it like a skunk works off to the side, without, you know, the centrality and the energy of the vortex, without the support from the top, without great people who have seen this work, who knows what great looks like, it will take too long and you'll be left in the dust.
Still on this notion of, on this topic of innovation, clearly organizations need to innovate and they need to disrupt the status quo. They also need to function and perform and you know, either produce products or services. How do you balance on one side the drive for innovation and the drive for a fail fast with, but on the other hand, ideally things would work and ideally customers would be able to rely on us, and our employees would kind of know from one day to the next what they're doing. Is this a challenge?
I think yesterday you were given the perfect answer, and I would reiterate it. It's not about what's new and old. It's not about existing products and new products. It's what are the 5 either most important problems you're faced with, or the 5 biggest growth opportunities that you have. And that's where, as you heard yesterday, so beautifully put, that's where you need to drill into the data. That's where you need to understand your users or your employees. That's where you need to put your best people to drive quickly to make new things. It may be existing products that need iterating. It may be brand new solutions using existing data. It's not old and new. It's going forward. What are the 5 problems or the 5, you know, most important elements that the company, as a senior team, it's 5. It's not 55. It's not 2. Right. That you then assign people to drill and drill and drill into. Often big companies have too many. Often small companies have too few. You assign the people, you get the right teams, and very, very fast, you start this work to involve the users of the data. You reflect on it. You create this low fidelity prototype, maybe an old problem, maybe a new one. Those are the 5 that you drill into as a team. That's what I've always done in Premier Farnell, in Thomas Cook, in IBM. It's 5. And together, we need to coalesce around those.
But then it means a lot of discipline on your part and on the top management team's part, right? Because again, whether it's, you know, me and IMD as a small and medium-sized organization, or CEOs I work with, there's a lot of stuff that happens, you know, people who want your opinion on this, and it's not always easy to stay focused, right? So do you remind yourself? So how do you do that? Because I see a lot of top management teams having, by the way, more than 5 priorities, but then allocating like 6% of their time to these 9 priorities and 94 to other stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think if you would forgive me for quoting a great professor, not at IMD, but, you know, Michael Porter, who I was privileged to spend a lot of time with as I started my CEO career. He had a new CEO program at Harvard in his own building. He used to say that, you know, great strategy well executed is as much what you don't do as it is what you do. And to your point, Jean-Francois, on discipline and focus, my goodness, if you haven't, as a senior leader, paid multiple millions to do your job, if you haven't got discipline and focus, and you can't keep those 9 with at least 50% of your best people, 50% of the measures that hit your desk every day, maybe you should find a different role. And it's the ability to block out. You know, I have found there are things, and this is, you know, every human being, every person on this call, there are things we like to do. I happen to love the brainstorming, the innovation, and I then have very, very good operational people around me that make sure every day we're looking at the output, applying it. Did it work? It didn't. You need good systems and processes. You need good people around you. You need to make sure that as a leader, you know what your great strengths are and what your searing weaknesses are. But, you know, if it's 9 things or 5 things, it is as key to say, I am not focused on this. I am not going to do these things. I have a great general counsel who addresses these legal issues. You know, I think the whole cultural people, having the right people to drive the innovational growth, I got very, very involved in. If you want, you know, almost half of your executive team to be diverse, then you will need to get involved in that. So you pick the things. It's not all the things, but I think Michael Porter was right on what it is you do and you don't do.
Steve Jobs, by the way, made a similar point. He said, people think focus is saying yes to a few things. Focus is saying no to 1,000 other things.
Exactly.
There is a question here. How do you measure success in growth and innovation? I guess part of it is financial, but sometimes it takes time for innovation to translate into financial. How do you gauge that the innovation process is healthy?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. A couple of things. First of all, in the agile methodologies that you employ, you could start on Monday with your teams. You know, the making part, the very quickly solutioning. Does this work for our clients? Does this work for our employee base? How do you iterate? Jean-Francois, we were discussing how, you know, universities iterate these amazing programs that they are developing. So I think you need to do this pally, very quickly going back to the users, to the clients, to the customers, and quickly assessing what could be done differently and better. Very, very fast, building a better, more robust prototype. The second is you really need, and you just mentioned the mighty Steve, but many other leaders would say this, get something symbolic out there. The first transistor radio, you know, wasn't perfect. The first iPod after the dot-com crash in 2001 had many, many issues that were later improved. And, you know, Adobe took an amazing risk to transform its entire business model. But the importance of the symbolism of getting your new innovation out there, getting a client behind your new solution so that you can start to build on that energy. Personally, I don't know what perfection looks like, but I know what some great new stuff looks like and we all do. And I think this iterating fast, saying, okay, that didn't work, or we could have done that better, is highly motivating to teams as well.
If you could see the energy right now within our building, you would indeed see the buzz that OWP Live is creating internally, with all the indeed the energy that comes with this. On a very different topic, but a very important one, a question around mental health. So clearly an issue exacerbated by the COVID crisis, with isolation, and now all this distancing and a lot of physical contact that can no longer take place. Do you think organizations have a responsibility to get involved in helping employees and managers with mental health issue, or is this something that the employees and the managers should deal with by themselves? What's the organization's role?
So I think that any organization, government, university, business, unit, we have a responsibility as leaders to embrace those who choose, and it is a war for talent, choose to come and work for us. And that embracing is because of their age, their sex, their color, their creed, their sexuality, their physical and cognitive ability. And the way I think that we as leaders embrace, I've already said, I think everyone needs a plan to improve, a visible, documented plan to improve their level of diversity and inclusion. But I think all of us have a responsibility to have, this is what I meant by the little graphic about our leadership magnetism, that we have connections with our team where we demonstrate great kindness, great empathy. We know what our teams are going through. We use each other in the teams to strengthen each other. Of course, the health and well-being of our employees is our responsibility to detect if more help is needed. And often that help will come from outside the company, but our job is with kindness and empathy to have established relationships one-on-one. Many of them at the moment are online, but as that changes and we can meet with people, knowing the questions to ask, caring, really ensuring that difficulties that may be embarrassing to share, deeply difficult from a pride perspective to uncover. Our job is to create safety, that it's okay to share. And then our job is to help find, not totally on our own, not totally at the company's, behest, the right solution. Yes, that is absolutely the leader's responsibility, in my opinion.
Harriet, maybe a last question. You worked on Watson. You were the general manager of that unit as it was developing, and of course, artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things is bringing with it enormous promise, but also a certain amount of concern. You worked in technology a big part of your career, and again over the last few years. How do you see the future of work? Clearly, some jobs are going to be destroyed, others are going to be created. Do you see this process as it's going to be okay because we're going to create as many as we're going to destroy? Do you see a likely imbalance either in the magnitude of the job or the timing? What is your view on the future of work and the role that companies should be playing in helping populations and their employees to move from one world to another?
Yes, I think the combinational force of technology, about which I'm generally quite positive before I worked for IBM and certainly during, but the combinational force of these epoch-changing technologies, cloud, artificial intelligence, and I'll come back to the core of this, which is all around our data, but the combinational force of an entire new generation of technologies combined with the trauma for all of us of a pandemic, a global pandemic that has forced us all to think differently and work differently. And then quite rightly, a very, very strong reaction to a lack of fairness and an imbalance of privilege in many countries of the world as it pertains to color and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think the combinational force of all of this means that all of our work has changed and will change inexorably. How we work, the tools with which we work, how we treat each other, how we hire, because we haven't, as universities, as governments, as businesses, truly reflected the most inclusive, even the best in the world could do better in how we think about those who do the work. But I do not think in terms of destruction. I think in terms of everyday actionable things. Why is this implosion happening? It is because of the data. So in very practical terms, all of us as individuals, as business people, need to be cognizant of and organizing our data. What is the data that we have? What do we want to do with that? What is the data that we need? How can we create new products, new services, securely and safely organized to get into the hands of our employees so they can work wherever they wish to, in the hands of our clients so they can drive new growth, into our hands of our governments in a secure and safe way so that any future spike or future pandemic is better handled. So I think the world has changed because of the combinational force of these amazing technologies, of the movements of fairness, which must be embraced, and because of a life-changing pandemic. But I am very positive that together with these capabilities, with these methodologies, we can start tomorrow to motivate our teams to be involved in solutions that help them, each other, and our clients.
Including by being much more sophisticated and systematic about the way we think of and manage our data. Harriet, thank you very much for these insights. Thank you also for caring and for your energy and for caring about our learning process. I think this caring was quite obvious in the thoughtfulness and the energy you put in these discussions. We're very grateful.
Thank you.
We wish you all the best. And again, thanks to all of you who watched. And I wish you a good continuation of your OWP Live journey.